Hello, geographers. The first place we're going to really talk about, or the areas of the Middle East that we're going to talk about, are Israel and Palestine. And these are two old places, but Israel's a new country, even though it's an old place. Palestine is an old place, but it is still striving for independence from Israel to be its own country, and whether that's going to happen anytime soon, we don't know. That's certainly what the Palestinians would like. You have a lot of people in Israel though that don't want that to see that happen. You have some people that probably do. But we're going to talk about just some very basic things so that when you do turn on the TV, when you do see things in the news or on Twitter or social media, you have kind of an understanding of the places that we're talking about. When we talk about Israel and Palestine, we're talking about this region right here. A lot of people might refer to it as the Holy Land. Jerusalem, which is a very holy city to different religions, is located there. So, oftentimes, when you learn about the Crusades and other things, they talk about the Holy Land. They tend to be talking about this. Places you've heard of, like Bethlehem, things like that, are located in this region. And there's been conflict over land, not necessarily people fighting over religion, but over the land, over which group should control the land for thousands and thousands of years. People have been saying, I heard a quote once where people said, well, those Muslims have been fighting over that land for thousands of years. Well, keep in mind what we learned in the last unit or last PowerPoint. How old is Islam? Only about 1400 years old. So they haven't been fighting over it for thousands of years. People have, but it's mostly different. It's not like two religions have been fighting each other for thousands of years. Different types of people have been fighting over it for thousands of years. So I've got a couple of quotes here. You're going to have to read through this on your own. Well, I guess I can read through it for you too. But One House, Two Stories. This is from a book called The Lemon Tree. And growing up, Dahlia would frequently ask her parents and teachers, "What are these houses we are living in?" "These are Arab houses," she was told. "What are these Arab houses that everyone talks about?" she would reply. Dahlia's school was in an Arab house, and there she would learn Israel's history. She learned about the creation of the State of Israel as a safe haven for the Jews. She studied the War of Independence as the story of a few against many. The Arabs had invaded, Dahlia would read, in order to destroy the new state, state means country, and throw the Jews into the sea. Most nations confronted with such hostilities would have been paralyzed, but tiny Israel had withstood 5 Arab armies. Little David had defeated Goliath. As for the Arabs, Dahlia's textbooks would report that they ran away, deserting their lands and abandoning their homes, fleeing before conquering the Israeli army. The Arabs, one textbook of the day declared, preferred to leave once the Jews had taken their towns. Dahlia accepted the history she was taught. Still, she was confused. Why, she wondered, would anyone leave so willingly? So keep this in mind as we learn about this different thing. But whose houses are they living in? The Arabs who left after the war. And of course, this history that she's reading is very one sided. Flip to another excerpt from that book, The Lemon Tree. This is the Arab perspective. We were exiled by a force of arms. We were exiled on foot. We were exiled to take the earth as our bed, and the sky as cover, and to be fed the crumbs of those among the governments and international organizations who imparted their charity. We were exiled, but we left our souls, our hopes, and our childhood in Palestine. We left our joys and sorrows. We left them in every corner and on every grain of sand in Palestine. We left them with each lemon fruit, with each olive. We left them in the roses and flowers. We left them in the flowering tree that stands with pride at the entrance of our house in al Ramla, We left them in the remains of our fathers and ancestors. We left them as witnesses in history. We left them hoping to return. So this sounds a little bit different than the last excerpt, right? Than the last one. This one is now saying, hey, we were forced out by arms. That means weapons, right? They left on foot. They left things behind, right? This is where their ancestors lived, and they want to return. These Palestinians became refugees living in other areas. Did all Palestinians leave Israel? No. Some became Israeli citizens, a minority group in Israel. We're going to talk about some Israeli places, or some important places in Israel, or the Holy Land, a little bit here. But I want you to keep those excerpts in mind about the conflict in this region. This is Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a holy city to Christians, Jews, and Muslims. It's probably, for most Christians and most Jews, the holiest city. All right, where for Muslims, it is the third holiest city behind Mecca and Medina that we learned about before. So there's some really, really old places. Jerusalem's one of the oldest cities in the world. The oldest inhabited city in the world is Damascus in Syria, just north of here. Here's the Dome of the Rock that we'll talk about. You can see the different sections of the old city. And you've got your Christian quarter, you have your Muslim quarter, you have your Jewish quarter, you have your Armenian quarter. The Wailing Wall, located here, I believe, and then the Dome of the Rock, located here, and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, located here. This is a very holy spiritual area. You notice Jerusalem is right on the border here. Israel considers it to be their capital. Most governments keep their embassies in Tel Aviv. Recently, it was controversial, but the United States moved our embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Here's the Dome of the Rock. Inside of here is a rock that, according to the Bible, the Torah, the Quran, is where Abraham attempted to sacrifice his son, or he was going to. Then God stops him. And so this is the place where many believe that Abraham was going to do it. Abraham is part of all three religions. There's the rock. You're not allowed to take pictures in there or photographs, but apparently a long time ago somebody did. That's why it's black and white. Another important place near Jerusalem is the Dead Sea. This is the saltiest lake in the world. It is the lowest elevation in the world, and it's located between Israel and Jordan, right? I think it's this one. No, one of these. Anyway, yeah, this one. So I think it's the same one, just it's starting to shrink. Maybe not. Anyway, it's so salty. Like, this guy isn't like touching the bottom. He just floats really easily there because the water is really dense with salt. It's much saltier than the ocean. Then here's the Wailing Wall, or known as the Western Wall. All right, it was believed to be built over 2,000 years ago. Considered holy because it was connected to Temple Mount. And so it's a very spiritual place to Jews. People will go there and pray, and they will take prayers and put them in little pieces of paper that you can see here into the wall. Here's the Pope praying there. You know, he's not Jewish, but anybody can pray there. So those are some important places. Peaceful years, Zionism to 1947. So we did mention this in the last PowerPoint, but the Jewish diaspora is where the Romans come in and take over this Middle Eastern place, and they rename a lot of places. And is the territory around what is now Israel was renamed by the Romans Palestine. So the people that lived there, didn't matter what ethnic group you were, they were going to call you Palestinians because that's where you're living. Well, after a while, a lot of the Jewish people leave. They flee to other places, whether it's Northern Africa, other parts of Asia, Europe, and that's the Jewish diaspora as they spread out. But later on, there's a movement, thousands of years later, to return home. And this is the Zionist movement, when Jews from around the globe begin moving back to Palestine. Zion means home. If you've ever watched like the movie Matrix, their home is Zion. So Zionism was a nationalist movement that supports the Jewish people's right to have their own Jewish state, their own Jewish country in the land of Israel. Following World War I, lots of European Jews moved to Palestine, and it was under control by Great Britain after World War I. I might have said World War II, but World War I. We talked about that. The Sykes-Picot Treaty, breaking this up into different regions. After World War, so the Palestinians were and still are Arab inhabitants of Palestine. They don't have to be any certain religion. Most of them happen to be Islamic, but some are Christians. Some are no religion at all, right? But for the most part, most of them are Islamic, but they don't have to be. There are Palestinian Arab Christians as well. 1947, this is after World War II. The United Nations, along with like Great Britain and France, have a proposal to create, as they take some of these regions that were carved out here, like Palestine down here. They say, you know what, we're going to turn it into two different countries, controlled by two different groups. And they're going to create a country for the Jews and a country for the Arab Palestinians. As all these, I might not have said it good enough, where all the Jewish people from around the world, especially maybe right before the Holocaust is getting going, afterwards are immigrating back to Israel, where their families or their ancestors had lived thousands of years before. Now, here was maybe a little bit of the problem. 55% of the land of Palestine would go to the Jews, even though the Jews only made up about 34% of the population. So take a look here. Here's the Israeli perspective. Their ancestors lived in the area nearly 2,000 years ago. They left. Jerusalem is home to the most important Jewish site, the Western Wall. The Palestinians, their ancestors have been living in the area for nearly 2,000 years. They've been there for 2,000 years. Jerusalem is home to the third most important Muslim site, Dome of the Rock, slash Al-Aqsa Mosque. So the creation of Israel, and now we're going to see the start really of conflict. Here's what is created after this. You have the Arab state, the Arab country in yellow, and the Jewish state in orange. However, the Palestinian Arabs say, no, we do not like this deal. This is our home. We have houses here for hundreds of years and longer. Our roads that are hundreds or thousands of years old, and we don't want to give this up. So it's accepted by the Jews and rejected by the Palestinians at the United Nations. May 15th, 1948, Israel declares itself an independent state, an independent country. You can see their flag with the Star of David on it. They are now a country. This is the first time ever the Jews have had their own country. Immediately, this new country is attacked by 5 Arab nations: Iraq, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon. All right, but the Jews win this war. And what ends up happening as these armies invade and Israel wins and counterattacks is Israel takes land that was set aside for the Palestinians. So Israel wins and takes the land that the UN had given to Palestinians. There's a ceasefire, but no treaty. No Arab country would recognize Israel, and 750,000 refugees flee. Like I said before, some Arabs stay living here, right? Some are staying and living in this purple area that is controlled by Israel. Others flee to other countries and they become refugees, Palestinian refugees. So after the war, Palestinian land was either controlled by Israel or by other Arab countries. So you can see here the dark purple is what was the dark purple is what was always supposed to be. Hang on. Yeah, the dark purple is what was always supposed to be Israel. All right. The green was supposed to be Palestine. Now look what happens over here. Israel is taking over all this, the dark purple that was always theirs, and the light purple, which was supposed to be Palestine. Now, the Gaza strip here, the Gaza area, Egypt took over part of this little strip here. And then on the other side, Jordan took over this area that was supposed to be Palestine. And so the Palestinians really are left with nothing. Today, and we're going to continue learning about this, the only area that Palestinians really have is the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. And a lot of the West Bank continues to disappear and become part of Israel. And there's a big argument that Israel's saying, hey, that really should be ours all along. Palestinians are saying, hey, no, this is ours. And so these are the two occupied territories that we'll continue talking about. You look at the different sides. The Israeli perspective. The state of Israel was created, the country of Israel. They win a war of independence after the Arab countries attack. The Holocaust and other periods of violence against Jews throughout the past centuries might not have happened if there was a Jewish homeland. So if they would have been living there all along, maybe they never had experienced some of those terrible things, whether it was the Holocaust or the pogroms in Russia, that type of thing. From the Palestinian perspective, they have no input really in the creation of these countries. They're just being told what's going to happen. It's the catastrophe, worst thing ever. Land set aside for Palestinians is now under either Arab countries' control or Israeli control. All right. Tomorrow we'll talk about more conflicts that occurred and kind of what direction we're currently heading.